Okay, I'm reading TILA from the Electronic Code of Federal Regulation, I believe, is the section I'm reading right now, titled Prohibited Acts and Practices and Certain Requirements for Credit Secured by a Dwelling. Definitions of a loan originator. 1. For purposes of this section, the term loan originator means a person who, in expectation of direct or indirect compensation or other monetary gain, or for direct or indirect compensation or other monetary gain, performs any of the following activities: takes an application, offers, arranges, assists a consumer in obtaining or applying to obtain, negotiates, or otherwise obtains or makes an extension of consumer credit for another person, or through advertising or other means of communication represents to the public that such person can or will perform any of these activities. The term loan originator includes any employee, agent, or contractor of the creditor or a loan or originator organization if the employee, agent, or contractor meets a definition. The term loan originator includes a creditor that engages in loan origination activities if the creditor does not finance a transaction at consummation out of the creditor's own resources, including a drawing on a bona fide warehouse line of credit or out of deposits held by the creditor. All creditors that engage in any of the foregoing loan origination activities are loan originators for purposes of paragraphs F and G of this section. The term does not include a person who does not take a consumer credit application or offer or negotiate credit terms available from a creditor, but who performs purely administrative or clerical tasks on behalf of a person who does engage in such activities. B, employee of a manufactured home retailer who does not take a consumer credit application, offer, and negotiate credit terms available from a creditor or advise the consumer on credit terms, including rates, fees, or other costs available from a creditor. C, a person that performs only real estate brokerage activities and is licensed or registered in accordance with applicable state law, unless such person is compensated by a creditor or loan originator or by an agent of such creditor or loan originator for a particular consumer credit transaction subject to this section. D, a seller financer that meets the criteria in paragraph A4 or A5 of this section as applicable. E, a servicer or servicers, employees, agents, and contractors who offer or negotiate terms for purposes of renegotiating, modifying, replacing, or subordinating principal of existing mortgages where consumers are behind in their payments and default or have a reasonable likelihood of defaulting or falling behind. This exception does not apply. However, to a servicer or servicers, employees, agents, and contractors who offer or negotiate a transaction that constitutes a refinancing under 1026-20A or obligates a different consumer on the existing debt. Roman numeral 2. An individual loan originator is a natural person who meets the definition of loan originator in paragraph A1, Roman numeral 1 of this section. A loan originator organization is any loan originator as defined in paragraph A1I of this section that is not an individual loan originator. 2. A mortgage broker for purposes of this section, a mortgage broker with respect to a particular transaction is any loan originator that is not an employer of the creditor. In compensation, the term compensation includes salaries, commissions, or any financial or similar incentive. Sellers or financers. 3. Properties. A person, as defined in 1026.2A22, that meets the following criteria is not a loan originator under paragraph A1 of this section. That's a person providing seller financing for the sale of 3 or fewer properties in any 12-month period to purchasers of such properties, each of which is owned by a person or serves as security for the financing. And 2, the person has not constructed or acted as a contractor for the construction of a residence of the property in the ordinary course of business of the person. And the person provides seller financing that meets the following requirements. A, the financing is fully amortizing. B, the financing is one that the person determines in good faith the consumer has a reasonable ability to repay. And C, the financing has a fixed rate or an adjustable rate that is adjustable after 5 or more years, subject to reasonable annual and lifetime limitations on interest rate increases. If the financing agreement has an adjustable rate, the rate is determined by the addition of a margin to the index rate and is subject to reasonable rate adjustment limitations. The index or adjustable rate is based on a widely available index such as the indices for U.S. Treasuries or LIBOR. 5. Seller financers, one property. A natural person, estate, or trust that meets all of the following criteria is not a loan originator under paragraph A1 of this section. A natural person, estate, or trust provides seller financing for the sale of only one property in any 12-month period to purchasers of such property which is owned by the natural person, estate, or trust who serves as security for the financing. 2. The natural person, estate, or trust has not constructed or acted as a contractor for the construction of a residence on the property in the ordinary course of business of the person. 3. The natural person, estate, or trust provides seller financing that meets the following requirements. A. The financing has a repayment schedule that does not result in negative AM. B. The financing has a fixed rate or adjustable rate that is adjustable after 5 or more years, subject to reasonable annual and lifetime limitations on interest rate increases. If the financing agreement has an adjustable rate, the rate is determined by the addition of a margin to an index rate and is subject to reasonable rate adjustment limitations. The adjustable rate is based on is a widely available index, such as indices for the U.S. Treasury securities or LIBOR. 6. Credit terms. For purposes of this section, the term credit terms includes rates, fees, and other costs. Credit terms are selected based on the consumer's financial characteristics when those terms are selected based on any factors that may influence a credit decision, such as debts, income, assets, or credit history. Scope. Paragraphs C1 and 2 of this section apply to closed-end consumer credit transactions secured by a consumer's principal dwelling. Paragraph C3 of this section applies to a consumer credit transaction secured by a dwelling. Paragraphs D through I of this section apply to closed-end consumer credit transactions secured by a dwelling. This section does not apply to a home equity line of credit subject to 1026-40, except that paragraphs H and I of this section apply to such credit when secured by the consumer's principal dwelling, and paragraph C3 applies to such credit when secured by a dwelling. Paragraphs D through I of this section do not apply to a loan that is secured by a consumer's interest in a timeshare plan. And servicing practices. Letter C. For purposes of this paragraph C, the term servicer and servicing have the same meanings as provided in RESPA. Payment processing. In connection with a consumer credit transaction secured by a consumer's principal dwelling, 1I, periodic payments, no servicer shall fail to credit a periodic payment to the consumer's loan account as of the date of receipt, except when a delay in crediting does not result in any charge to the consumer or in the reporting of negative information to the consumer reporting agency, or except as provided in paragraph C1, Roman numeral 3 of the section. A periodic payment, as used in this paragraph C, is an amount sufficient to cover principal, interest, and escrow if applicable for a given billing cycle. A payment qualifies as a periodic payment even if it does not include amounts required to cover late fees, other fees, or non-escrow payments the servicer has advanced on the consumer's behalf. Partial payments. Any servicer that retains a partial payment, meaning any payment less than a periodic payment in a suspense or unapplied account, shall A. disclose the consumer the total amount of funds held in such suspense or unapplied funds account on the periodic statement as required by REg Z section 41. D3 if a periodic statement is required, and B on accumulation of sufficient funds to cover a periodic payment in any suspense or unapplied funds account. Treat such funds as a periodic payment received in accordance with paragraph C1I of the section. Roman numeral 3, non-conforming payments. If a servicer specifies in writing requirements for the consumer to follow in making payments but accepts a payment that does not conform to the requirements, the servicer shall credit the payment as of 5 days after receipt. Number 2, no pyramiding of late fees. In connection with consumer credit transactions secured by a consumer's principal dwelling, a servicer shall not impose any late fee or delinquency charge for a payment if such fee or charge is attributable solely to the failure of the consumer to pay a late fee or delinquency charge on an earlier payment, and 2, the payment is otherwise a periodic payment received on the due date or within any applicable courtesy period. 3, payoff statements. In connection with consumer credit transactions secured by a consumer's dwelling, a creditor, assignee, or servicer, as applicable, must provide an accurate statement of the total outstanding balance that would be required to pay the consumer's obligation in full as of a specified date. The statement shall be sent within a reasonable time, but in no case more than 7 business days after receiving a written request from the consumer or any person acting on behalf of the consumer. When a creditor, assignee, or servicer, as applicable, is not able to provide the statement within 7 business days of such a request because the loan is in bankruptcy or foreclosure, because the loan is a reverse mortgage or shared appreciation mortgage, or because the natural disasters or other similar circumstances, the payoff statement must be provided provided within a reasonable time. A creditor or assignee that does not currently own the mortgage loan or the mortgage servicing rights is not subject to the requirements in paragraph C3 to provide a payoff statement. D. Prohibited payments to loan originators. So just so you know, I just went into payoff statements. But now we're going to circle right back around to prohibited payments to loan originators, which I thought this whole section was about to begin with. After now getting through what a loan originator is and a servicer is, and payoff statements are: 1. Payments based on a term of a transaction are prohibited to be paid to the loan originator. I, except as provided in paragraph D1, Roman numeral 3 or 4 of the section, in connection with the consumer credit transaction secured by a dwelling, no loan originator shall receive and no person shall pay to a loan originator directly or indirectly compensation in an amount that is based on a term of a transaction in terms of multiple transactions by an individual loan originator, or the terms of multiple transactions and multiple individual loan originators. If a loan originator's compensation is based in whole or in part on a factor that is a proxy for a term of the transaction, the loan originator's compensation is based on a term of transaction. A factor that is not itself a term of a transaction is a proxy for a term of the transaction if the factor consistently varies with that term over a significant number of transactions, and the loan originator has the ability, directly or indirectly, to add, drop, or change the factor in originating the transaction. Roman numeral 2, for purposes of the paragraph D1 only, a term of a transaction is any right or obligation of the parties to a credit transaction. The amount of credit extended is not a term of a transaction or a proxy for a term of a transaction, provided that compensation received by or paid to a loan originator directly or indirectly is based on a fixed percentage of the amount of credit extended. However, such compensation may be subject to a minimum or maximum dollar amount. Alright, I'm just going to go backwards to where we started talking about proxy, because I always need some clarification here. I always rush through this. If a loan originator's compensation is based in whole or in part on a factor that is a proxy for a term of a transaction, the loan originator's compensation is based on a term of a transaction. A factor that is not itself a term of the transaction is a proxy for a term of the transaction if the factor consistently varies with that term over a significant number of transactions, and the loan originator has the ability, directly or indirectly, to add, drop, or change the factor in originating the transaction. For purposes of this paragraph D1, only a term of a transaction is any right or obligation of the parties to a credit transaction. The amount of credit extended is not a term of a transaction or a proxy for a term of a transaction, provided that compensation received by or paid to a loan originator directly or indirectly is based on a fixed percentage of the amount of credit extended. However, such compensation may be subject to a minimum or maximum dollar amount. Roman numeral 3, an individual loan originator may receive and a person may pay to an individual loan originator compensation in the form of a contribution to a defined contribution plan that is designated tax advantage plan, or a benefit under a defined plan that is a designated tax advantage plan. In the case of a contribution to a defined contribution plan, the contribution shall not be directly or indirectly based on the terms of the individual loan originator's transactions. As used in this paragraph D1 Roman numeral 3, designated tax advantage plan means any plan that meets the requirements of the Internal Revenue Code section 401A in Title 26 of the United States Code, an employee annuity plan described in section 403A, a simple retirement account as defined in Internal Revenue Code 408, section 408P, a simplified employee pension described in IRS Code section 408K, an annuity contract described in section 403B, or an eligible deferred compensation plan as discussed in section 457B. Numeral 4, an individual loan originator may receive and a person may pay to an individual loan originator compensation under a non-deferred profits-based compensation plan. For example, any arrangement for the payment of non-deferred compensation that is determined with reference to the profits of a person from mortgage-related business, provided that a compensation paid to the individual loan originator pursuant to paragraph D1 Roman numeral 4 is not directly or indirectly based on the terms of an individual loan originator transactions that are subject to paragraph D, and at least one of the following conditions is satisfied. That's 1, the compensation paid to the individual loan originator pursuant to this paragraph does not, in the aggregate, exceed 10% of the individual loan originator's total compensation corresponding to the time period for which the compensation under the non-deferred profits-based compensation plan is paid, or 2, the individual loan originator was a loan originator for 10 or fewer transactions subject to this paragraph D consummated during a 12-month period preceding the date of the compensation determination. 2, payments by persons other than the consumer. This is dual compensation. Section Roman numeral I. A, except as provided in paragraph D2, Roman numeral 1C of this section, if any loan originator receives compensation directly from the consumer in a consumer credit transaction secured by a dwelling, no loan originator shall receive compensation directly or indirectly from any person other than the consumer in connection with the transaction, and no person who knows or has reason to know of the consumer paid compensation to the loan originator other than the consumer shall pay any compensation to a loan originator directly or indirectly in connection with the transaction. Compensation received directly from a consumer includes payments to a loan originator made pursuant to an agreement between the consumer and a person other than the creditor or its affiliates, under which such person agrees to provide funds toward the consumer's costs of the transaction, including loan originator compensation. C, if a loan originator organization receives compensation directly from a consumer in connection with the transaction, the loan originator organization may pay compensation to an individual loan originator, and the individual loan originator may receive compensation from the loan originator organization subject to paragraph B1 of this section. Roman numeral 2, the exemption here, a payment to a loan originator that is otherwise prohibited under section 129B(c)(2)(a) of TILA is nevertheless permitted pursuant to that to B of that particular section of the Act, regardless of whether the consumer makes any upfront payment of discount points, origination points, or fees as described in section, and that's section Roman numeral 2 of that section of the Act, as long as the loan originator does not receive any compensation directly from the consumer as described in B Roman numeral 1 of the Act. Affiliates. For purposes of paragraph D, affiliates shall be treated as a single person. Letter E, prohibition on steering. 1. General. In connection with a consumer credit transaction secured by a dwelling, a loan originator shall not direct or steer a consumer to consummate a transaction based on the fact that the originator will receive a greater compensation from the creditor in that transaction than in other transactions the originator offered or could have offered to the consumer, unless the consummated transaction is in the consumer's interest. Permissible transactions. A transaction does not violate paragraph E1 of the section if the consumer is presented with loan options that meet the conditions in paragraph E3 of the section for each type of transaction in which the consumer expressed an interest. For purposes of paragraph E of this section, the term type of transaction refers to whether a loan has an APR that cannot increase after consummation, the loan has an APR that may increase after consummation, or the loan is a reverse mortgage. 3. Loan options presented. A transaction satisfies paragraph E2 of this section, which is a permissible transaction, only if the loan originator presents the loan options required by that paragraph and all of the following conditions are met. 1. The loan originator must obtain loan options from a significant number of creditors with which the originator regularly does business, and for each type of transaction in which the consumer expressed an interest, must present the consumer with loan options that include the loan with the lowest interest rate, the loan with the lowest interest rate without negative AM, a prepayment penalty, interest-only payments, a balloon payment in the first 7 years of the life of the loan, demand feature, shared equity, or shared appreciation, or in the case of a reverse mortgage loan without a prepayment penalty or shared equity or shared appreciation, and C, the loan with the lowest total dollar amount of discount points, origination points, and origination fees, or if 2 or more loans have the same dollar amount of discounted points, or origination fees, the loan with the lowest interest rate that has the lowest total dollar amount of discount points, origination points, or origination fees. Roman numeral 2. The loan originator must have a good faith belief that the options presented to the consumer pursuant to paragraph E3, Roman numeral 1 of this section, are loans for which the consumer likely qualifies. Roman numeral 3, for each type of transaction. If the originator presents to the consumer more than 3 loans the originator must highlight the loans that satisfy the criteria specified in paragraph E3I of the section. Number 4, number of loan options presented. The loan originator can present fewer than 3 loans and satisfy paragraphs E2 and E3.1 of the section if the loans presented to the consumer satisfy the criteria of the options in paragraph E3.1 of the section and the provisions of paragraph E3 of the section are otherwise met. Letter F. Loan originator qualification requirements. A loan originator for a consumer credit transaction secured by a dwelling must, when required by applicable state or federal law, be registered and licensed in accordance with those laws, including the SAFE Act, its implementing regulations, and State SAFE Act implementing law. To comply with this paragraph F, a loan originator organization that is not a government agency or state housing finance agency must comply with all applicable state law requirements for legal existence and foreign qualification. And 2, ensure that each individual loan originator who works for the loan originator organization is licensed and registered to the extent the individual is required to be licensed or registered under the SAFE Act, its implementing regs, and State SAFE Act implementing law before the individual acts as a loan originator in a consumer credit transaction secured by a dwelling. And 3, for each of its individual loan originator employees who is not required to be licensed and is not licensed as a loan originator pursuant to what's that? What is this? That's the SAFE Act of this chapter, or State SAFE Act implementation law. Obtain for any individual whom the loan originator organization hired on or after January 1 of 2014, or whom the loan originator organization hired before this date, but for whom there were no applicable statutory or regulatory background standards in effect at the time of hire before January 1 of 2014, used to screen the individual, and for any individual regardless of when hired, based on reliable information known to the loan originator organization likely does not meet the standards under 1026.36 F3.2 before the individual acts as a loan originator in a consumer credit transaction secured by a dwelling. A criminal background check through the nationwide mortgage licensing system and registry, NMLSR, or in the case of an individual loan originator who is not a registered loan originator under the NMLSR, a criminal background check from a law enforcement agency or commercial service. And B, a credit report from a consumer reporting agency described in the Fair Credit Reporting Act, secured where applicable in compliance with the requirements of the Fair Credit Reporting Act, and information from the NMLSR about any administrative, civil, or criminal findings by any government jurisdiction, or in the case of an individual loan originator who is not a registered loan originator under the NMLSR, such information from the individual loan originator. 2, determine on the basis of the information obtained pursuant to paragraph F3I of this section and any other information reasonably available to the loan originator organization for any individual whom the loan originator organization hired on or after January 1st, 2014, or whom the loan originator organization hired before this date, but for whom there were no applicable statutory or regulatory background standards in effect at the time of hire before January 1 of 2014, used to screen the individual, and for any individual background standards in effect at the time of hire or before but for whom there were no applicable statutory or regulatory background standards in effect at the time of the hire before January 1, 2014, used to screen the individual, and for any individual regardless of when hired who, based on reliable information known to the loan originator organization, likely does not meet the standards under the paragraphs F3.2 of the before the individual acts as a loan originator in a consumer credit transaction secured by a dwelling, that the individual loan originator, A1, has not been convicted of or pleaded guilty or no low contendere to a felony in a domestic or military court during the preceding 7-year period, or in the case of a felony involving active fraud, dishonesty, a breach of trust, or money laundering at any time. And 2, for purposes of this paragraph, a crime is a felony only if at the time of conviction it was classified as a felony under the law or jurisdiction under which the individual is convicted. Expunged convictions and pardoned convictions do not render an individual unqualified. And a conviction or plea of guilty or nolo contendere does not render an individual unqualified under section 1026.36F if the loan originator organization has obtained consent to employ an individual from the FDIC pursuant to section 19 of the the Federal Insurance Deposit Act, NCUA, all these chapters of different prudential regulators, and notwithstanding the bars imposed with respect to that conviction or plea by those regulators as applicable, and B, has demonstrated financial responsibility, character, and general fitness, such as to warrant a determination that the individual loan originator will operate honestly, fairly, and efficiently, and provide periodic training covering federal and state law requirements that apply to the individual loan originator's loan origination activities. Letter G, name an NMLS-R ID on loan documents. For a consumer credit transaction secured by a dwelling, a loan originator's organization must include on the loan documents described under paragraph G2 of this section whenever each such a loan document is provided to a consumer or presented to a consumer for signature as applicable, its name and NMLS-R ID, if the NMLS-R has provided it to the NMLS-R ID, and the name of the individual loan originator as the name appears on the NMLS-R ID with primary responsibility for the origination, and if the NMLS-R has provided such person an NMLS-R ID, that NMLS-R ID. The loan documents that must include the names and NMLS-R ID pursuant to paragraph G1 of the section are the credit application, disclosures required under 1026.19 E and F, and the note or loan contract, and the security instrument. Those disclosures are basically the new loan estimate, if I remember correctly. For purposes of this section, NMLS-R ID means a number assigned by the nationwide mortgage licensing system and registry to facilitate electronic tracking and uniform identification of loan originators and public access to the employment history of and public adjudicated disciplinary and enforcement actions against loan originators. H, prohibition on mandatory arbitration clauses and waivers of certain consumer rights. 1. Arbitration. A contract or other agreement for a consumer credit transaction secured by a dwelling, including a home equity line of credit secured by the consumer's principal dwelling, may not include terms that require arbitration or any other non-judicial procedure to resolve any controversy or settle any claims arising out of the transaction. This prohibition does not limit a consumer and creditor or any assignee from agreeing after a dispute or claim under the transaction arises to settle or use arbitration or other non-judicial procedure to resolve that dispute or claim. So basically, we just moved, we're still in a section titled Prohibited Acts or Practices and Certain Requirements for Credit Secured by a Dwelling. We just ran right through mortgage loan originator compensation, and now we're going into the prohibition on mandatory arbitration. We just discussed arbitration. Now we're talking about no waivers of federal statutory causes of action. And what that means is a contract or other agreement relating to consumer credit transactions secured by a dwelling, including a home equity line of credit secured by the consumer's principal dwelling, may not be applied or interpreted to bar a consumer from bringing a claim in court pursuant to any provision of law for damages or other relief in connection with any alleged violation of any federal law. This prohibition does not limit a consumer or creditor or any assignee from agreeing after a dispute or claim under the transaction arises to settle or use arbitration or other non-judicial procedure to resolve the dispute or the claim. Moving on, letter I, there's a prohibition on financing credit insurance. The creditor may not finance directly or indirectly any premiums or fees for credit insurance in connection with the consumer credit transaction secured by a dwelling, including a home equity line of credit secured by the consumer's principal dwelling. This prohibition does not apply to credit insurance for which premiums or fees are calculated and paid in full on a monthly basis. For purposes of this paragraph, credit insurance means the credit life, credit disability, credit unemployment, or credit property insurance, or any other accident, loss of income, life, or health insurance, or any payments directly or indirectly for any debt cancellation or suspension agreement or contract, but excludes credit unemployment insurance for which the unemployment insurance premiums are reasonable. The creditor receives no direct or indirect compensation in connection with the unemployment insurance premiums, and the unemployment insurance premiums are paid pursuant to a separate insurance contract and are not paid to an affiliate of the creditor. And Roman numeral 2, a creditor finances premiums or fees for credit insurance if it provides a consumer the right to defer payment of a credit insurance premium or a fee owned by the consumer beyond the monthly period in which the premium or fee is due. And Roman numeral 3, credit insurance premiums or fees are calculated on a monthly basis if they are determined mathematically by multiplying a rate by the actual monthly outstanding balance. J. Policies and procedures to ensure and monitor compliance. 1. A depository institution must establish and maintain written policies and procedures reasonably designed to ensure and monitor the compliance of the depository institution, its employees, its subsidiaries, and its subsidiaries' employees with the requirements of paragraph D, E, F, and G of this section. These written policies and procedures must be appropriate to the nature, size, complexity, and scope of the mortgage lending activities of the depository institution and subsidiaries. For purposes of the paragraph J, which is policies and procedures to ensure and monitor compliance, depository institution has the meaning of this section under the SAFE Act. For purpose of this paragraph, subsidiary is the meaning under the FDIC Insurance Act. FDIC, Federal Deposit Insurance Act. Negative amortization and counseling. Letter K. Negative amortization counseling required. A creditor. That's number 1. Counseling required. A creditor shall not extend credit to a first-time borrower in connection with a closed-end transaction secured by tolling other than a reverse mortgage transaction subject to 102333 or a transaction secured by a consumer's interest in a timeshare plan that may result in negative AM unless the creditor receives documentation that the consumer has obtained homeownership counseling from a counseling organization or counselor certified or approved by the U.S. HUD to provide such counseling. Definitions. For purposes of the paragraph, a first-time home buyer means a consumer who has not previously received a closed-end credit transaction or open-end credit plan securing a dwelling. Negative AM means a payment schedule with regular periodic payments that cause principal balance to increase. And student prohibited. A creditor that extends credit to a first-time home buyer in connection with a closed-end transaction secured by a dwelling other than a reverse mortgage transaction or a timeshare plan that may result in negative AM shall not steer or otherwise direct consumers to choose a particular counselor or counseling organization for the counseling required under paragraph K. So the next section, 1026.37, is the content of disclosures for certain mortgage transactions. And in parentheses, it says loan estimate. So I'm guessing that this section is actually where we talk about the simplification of disclosures under RESPA and Reg Z. But we'll get into that in the next recording session. Yay.